My own breath was killing me and my brother just stood there watching. The air in the room felt like it was burning my lungs from the inside out, but this heat wasn't coming from any external source. This was my first heat, and my body was literally on fire. Every nerve ending screamed, every muscle trembled, and the fever coursing through my veins made thinking nearly impossible. Dane had locked the door from the outside. I heard the click, heard his footsteps fade away, and I knew this wasn't some accident or misunderstanding. He had trapped me here deliberately, fully aware of what happens to an Omega during their first heat cycle. The vulnerability, the loss of control, the desperate need that clouds all rational thought. Why would he do this? The question spun through my fevered mind like a broken record. This was my brother, the person who was supposed to protect me, who grew up sharing the same roof, the same parents, the same childhood memories. But as I collapsed against the wall, sweat soaking through my clothes and my vision blurring at the edges, I realized something terrifying. Dane had planned this. He knew my heat was coming. He had been tracking my cycle, waiting for this exact moment when I would be at my most defenseless. Then I heard them. Heavy footsteps approaching from the hallway outside. Not Dane's familiar gait, but something else entirely. Slower, heavier, deliberate. The footsteps of someone who walked with authority and power. An alpha. My heart slammed against my ribcage so hard I thought it might crack. The Omega inside me, that primal, instinctive part of my biology. I barely understood, immediately recognized the approaching presence. Danger. Predator. Threat. My hands clawed at the door handle uselessly, but it was locked from the outside. I was trapped, and someone was coming for me. The realization hit me like ice water. Despite the burning heat, Dane had called someone. He had invited a stranger here, an alpha, while I was in heat. My mind raced through the implications, each one more horrifying than the last. Was this about money? Power? Some twisted deal I couldn't begin to comprehend? The footsteps stopped right outside the door and I heard the lock turning. My body froze, every muscle locking up in terror even as the heat continued to rage through my system, making everything feel too sensitive, too raw, too exposed. The door swung open and a man stepped inside. My first impression was overwhelming. Tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway. He wore an expensive suit, the kind that probably cost more than my family's monthly rent, perfectly tailored and immaculate, but it was his face that made my breath catch. Sharp jawline, dark eyes that seemed to see straight through me, and an expression of cold calculation that sent chills down my spine despite my fever. This was an alpha in every sense of the word. I could feel his dominance radiating off him in waves, pressing against my senses like a physical weight. He took one step into the room, and his eyes found me immediately. I was curled against the far wall, probably looking pathetic and desperate. Exactly what I was in that moment. For a long second he just stared at me and I watched something shift in his expression. His nostrils flared slightly as he caught my scent, the unmistakable pheromones of an Omega in heat. But instead of the predatory interest I expected, his face hardened into something that looked almost like fury. His head snapped toward where Dane was lingering in the hallway, trying to stay out of sight but clearly waiting for whatever was supposed to happen next. The alpha's voice when he spoke was arctic, cold and sharp enough to cut glass. "You piece of filth." The words made my blood run cold despite the heat burning through me. He moved with frightening speed, crossing the space between them in 2 long strides and grabbing Dane by the collar of his shirt. My brother actually yelped, his feet briefly leaving the ground as this stranger slammed him against the hallway wall. "You're selling your own blood? Your brother?" Dane sputtered something about money, about opportunities, about arrangements that had already been made. His words tumbled over each other in panic justification. But this alpha, whose name I would later learn was Cade, wasn't listening. With one violent shove, he threw Dane aside like he weighed nothing. My brother hit the opposite wall and crumpled, gasping for breath. I sat frozen, watching this unfold with a mixture of terror and confusion. Was this alpha angry because he wanted me for himself? Was this some kind of territorial dispute over who got to claim the helpless Omega? My mind couldn't process what was happening. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. Cade turned back to me and I instinctively pressed myself harder against the wall, trying to disappear. But he stopped several feet away, maintaining distance even though every alpha instinct he possessed must have been screaming at him to come closer to an omega in heat. His jaw clenched as he visibly fought for control. And then he did something completely unexpected. He shrugged off his suit jacket and tossed it toward me. It landed on the floor between us. "Cover yourself. I'm taking you out of here." His voice was rough, strained with the effort of maintaining control, but there was something in it that wasn't pure aggression. Was it concern? Protection? I couldn't tell. My heat-addled brain couldn't distinguish between threat and safety anymore. But as I stared at him, trembling and confused, I realized I didn't have much choice. Staying here meant waiting for whatever Dane had originally planned. Going with this stranger was a gamble, but it was the only option that offered any chance of escape. I grabbed the jacket with shaking hands and wrapped it around myself. The fabric smelled like hemp pine and something darker, more complex. Alpha pheromones that should have terrified me but somehow didn't quite trigger the panic they should have. Cade moved closer then, slowly, telegraphing his movements like someone approaching a wounded animal. When he reached down to lift me, I was too weak to resist. The heat had drained all my strength, leaving me barely able to stand, let alone fight. He picked me up like I weighed nothing, cradling me against his chest with surprising gentleness for someone who had just thrown my brother across a room. His scent surrounded me completely now. And despite everything, my omega instincts responded to the proximity of such a powerful alpha. My body relaxed fractionally against him, even as my mind screamed warnings. Cade carried me out of that room, down the hallway past where Dane was still slumped against the wall. My brother didn't try to stop us. Maybe he was too stunned, or maybe he recognized that fighting this particular alpha would be a losing battle. The cool air outside hit my overheated skin like a blessing. Cade's car was parked right out front. Of course it was expensive, sleek and black like everything else about him. He placed me in the passenger seat with unexpected care, immediately cranking the air conditioning to maximum before circling around to the driver's side. The drive to wherever we were going passed in a blur. I drifted in and out of consciousness, vaguely aware of the cool air on my skin, the smooth leather seats, and the tense silence from the man driving. Cade's jaw remained tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. He was fighting his own instincts, I realized dimly, fighting the biological imperative that demanded he respond to an omega in heat. But he was winning that fight, maintaining control through sheer willpower. When we finally stopped, I recognized the emergency entrance of a hospital. Cade was out of the car instantly, lifting me again and striding through the automatic doors with the kind of authority that made people move out of his way automatically. Nurses appeared, a wheelchair materialized, and suddenly I was being whisked down bright corridors while Cade's voice issued commands that sounded less like requests and more like orders that would be obeyed. Private room. Best doctors. Heat suppressants immediately. He stayed by my side through it all. A constant presence that my heat-confused senses latched onto as something solid and real in a world that had become frighteningly unstable. When the medication finally kicked in and the burning fever began to subside, I could think clearly for the first time in hours. That's when I actually looked at him. Really looked. Cade stood by the window, backlit by the afternoon sun, and despite the expensive clothes and commanding presence, he looked exhausted. There were shadows under his eyes, tension in every line of his body. When he noticed I was awake and lucid, he turned to face me fully. "What's your name?" His voice was softer now, though still carrying that underlying thread of steel. I swallowed, my throat dry from fever and fear. "Ethan." He nodded slowly, processing this simple piece of information like it mattered, like I mattered. Then he moved closer to the bed, and his next question cut straight to the heart of everything that had happened. "Your family, they knew what they were doing?" What could I say to that? Yes. They knew? Yes. My own brother had orchestrated this nightmare for whatever reason I still didn't fully understand. My silence answered for me. Something dangerous flickered in Cade's dark eyes, and when he spoke again, his words were absolute and uncompromising. "You're not going back there, ever." It wasn't a question or a suggestion. It was a decision made without my input, a line drawn in the sand that apparently wasn't up for negotiation. And for the first time since my heat started, I felt something other than fear and confusion. I felt the smallest flicker of what might possibly be safety. But even through the medication haze, one question dominated my thoughts. Why was this alpha helping me? What did he want in return? And what would happen when he eventually told me the price for his protection? When I opened my eyes to an unfamiliar ceiling, panic set in before rational thought could catch up. This wasn't the hospital room where I had fallen asleep. The ceiling here was high, modern, with recessed lighting that cast a warm glow across what appeared to be an enormous bedroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated one wall, offering a view of the city skyline that looked like something from a magazine spread. Where was I? How did I get here? The last thing I clearly remembered was the hospital, the suppressants being administered, and Cade's presence as I finally drifted off into exhausted sleep. I tried to sit up, my body still weak and uncoordinated from the aftermath of my heat cycle when the door opened. Cade walked in carrying a tray, and the domestic normalcy of the gesture seemed completely at odds with the intimidating alpha who had rescued me. He set the tray on the bedside table with careful precision, and when he looked at me his expression was unreadable. "Eat. You've been out for 12 hours. 12 hours? I stared at the food, actual proper breakfast with eggs, toast, fresh fruit and coffee that smelled expensive, then back at him. My voice came out rougher than I intended, scratchy from disuse. "Where am I?" Cade pulled up a chair and sat down, maintaining some distance but close enough that I could see the fatigue still lingering in his features. He looked like he hadn't slept at all during those 12 hours I had been bedons. "My place. You'll stay here until I sort out the mess your family created." The casual way he said it, like having a stranger move into his home was perfectly normal, made my head spin. Before I could formulate a response or protest, he continued. "I've filed a police report against your brother. Trafficking charges. If he comes near you, he's going to jail." My heart dropped into my stomach. Police reports. Trafficking charges. Legal consequences. This had escalated far beyond anything I could have imagined when I first woke up in that locked room. Dane wasn't just in trouble. He was potentially facing serious criminal charges, and I was at the center of it all, whether I wanted to be or not. Over the next few days, I began to understand exactly who Cade was and what kind of power he wielded. He wasn't just wealthy, he was influential. CEO of a multinational corporation whose name I recognized from news headlines. The penthouse where I was staying was one of several properties he owned. People jumped when he made requests, and doors opened at his command. He used every bit of that power and influence to build walls of protection around me. I asked him once, during one of our quiet moments, why he was doing all this. He was standing by the window in his home office, the city lights creating a halo effect behind him, and he didn't turn around when he answered. Because someone should. The response was simple but laden with something heavier, something painful. There was a story there, I realized, buried in those 3 words. Some past hurt or loss that explained why a powerful alpha would drop everything to protect a stranger. But I didn't have the courage to push further, to demand answers I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. My own room in the penthouse was more luxurious than anywhere I had ever lived. Everything I needed appeared before I thought to ask for it. Clothes in my size, all new with tags still attached. Toiletries in the bathroom, and I noticed with surprise that there were omega-specific products, heat-tracking supplies, specialized soaps and lotions, even emergency suppressants. Someone had thought of everything, planned for every possible need. It felt less like I was a guest and more like I had been expected. One evening, unable to sleep, I ventured out to get water. The penthouse was quiet at this late hour, but I found Cade in the kitchen, laptop open in front of him, coffee cup at his elbow. He was still in his work clothes, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, looking like he had come straight from the office hours ago and never bothered to change. When he saw me, he didn't speak, just gestured to the chair across from him. I sat, and he turned the laptop screen to face me. Legal documents filled the display, dense text that my tired brain struggled to process. But he pointed to specific sections, explaining in simple terms what I was looking at. Restraining order against Dane. Custody papers establishing your independence as an adult Omega. Sign here. He slid a pen across the table. My hand trembled as I picked it up. These documents represented more than just legal protection. They were a severance of the last ties to my family, my past, everything I had known before this nightmare began. Was this freedom or just trading one cage for another? But looking at Cade's serious expression, at the care he had taken to protect me, I realized that staying with him was safer than any alternative I could imagine. I signed where he indicated, my signature looking shaky and uncertain next to his bold, confident script. He collected the papers, folded them with precise movements, and looked directly at me. "You're safe now, I promise." Something in his voice made me believe him, and that was perhaps the most frightening thing of all, how quickly I was learning to trust this man I barely knew. That night the nightmares came. I was back in that room, locked door, rising heat and Dane's footsteps approaching. But in the dream, Cade never arrived. No one came to save me. I was screaming but no sound emerged, trapped in silent horror as the door opened to reveal shadows and threats my subconscious couldn't quite give form to. I woke up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, heart racing. And Cade was there, not hovering, not demanding explanations, just sitting in the chair beside my bed with a glass of water already in hand. He must have heard me through the walls, must have come to check on me. "It's just a dream. You're here. You're safe." He didn't try to touch me, didn't invade my space, just remained present and solid until my breathing calmed and reality reasserted itself. Then he stayed there, keeping watch through the rest of the night. The silent guardian who asked nothing in return. When I finally drifted back into uneasy sleep, my last conscious thought was that this man, this stranger who had become my protector, was unlike anyone I had ever encountered. The next morning I woke to find him gone, but evidence of his vigil remained. The chair was still positioned by my bed, a blanket draped over it, suggesting he had stayed far longer than just until I fell asleep. On the nightstand was a note in neat handwriting, "Meeting until noon. Kitchen stocked. Call if you need anything." He had left his personal number, I realized. Not an assistant or security, but his direct line. The gesture felt significant, though I couldn't quite articulate why. It was trust, perhaps, or at least the beginning of it. He was giving me access to him, making himself available in a way that seemed unusual for someone of his position and power. I spent the morning exploring the penthouse more thoroughly, learning the space that had become my sanctuary. Every room was immaculate, decorated with expensive but understated taste. But it was the small details that caught my attention: the stocked refrigerator with food I actually liked, the bookshelf filled with genres I enjoyed reading. The temperature kept cooler than most alphas preferred, but perfect for an omega's comfort. He had been paying attention, learning about me even in the short time we had spent together. When Cade returned that afternoon, he found me curled up on the living room couch with one of the books from his collection. He paused in the doorway and something flickered across his face: surprise, maybe, or satisfaction, like he had hoped to find me making myself at home but hadn't quite expected it. "Good book?" I nodded, marking my place. He moved further into the room, loosening his tie with one hand, and for the first time since this began, we had a conversation that felt almost normal. He asked about the book, I asked about his work, and we talked until the sun set outside those massive windows. It was easy, comfortable, and terrifyingly domestic. That's when I began to realize the truth. I wasn't just staying here temporarily. This was becoming my life, and Cade was becoming far more than just my rescuer. He was becoming someone I relied on, someone whose presence I anticipated, someone who made me feel things I wasn't ready to examine too closely. The stranger who saved me was transforming into something more complicated, and I had no idea how to handle that shift or what it meant for my future. 2 weeks passed before my body delivered its next devastating blow. I had been feeling progressively worse over several days of persistent exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure, waves of dizziness that struck without warning, and a strange sensitivity to smells that made even coffee nauseating. At first I attributed it to stress or lingering effects from my heat cycle. But when I woke up one morning and barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting, a cold suspicion began forming in the back of my mind. My hands shook as I opened the medicine cabinet, not really expecting to find what I was looking for. But there it was, tucked behind other supplies: a pregnancy test, still in its box. Had Cade put this here? The thought seemed absurd. But everything else in this bathroom had been deliberately chosen and placed. I stared at the box for a long moment, fear warring with the need to know for certain. The test took 3 minutes. I spent those 180 seconds sitting on the cold tile floor, knees pulled to my chest, trying not to think about what a positive result would mean. When the timer on my phone finally buzzed, I couldn't bring myself to look immediately, but ignorance wouldn't change reality. I forced myself to pick up the test, and there it was, two clear, undeniable lines. Positive. The test clattered to the floor as the full implications crashed over me. Pregnant. I was pregnant. My mind immediately started calculating dates, and the timeline pointed to one horrifying conclusion. My heat. That room. Before Cade arrived, there had been another alpha. I remembered fragments. Pain, fear, my body too weak from heat to fight back effectively. Dane had let someone in before Cade showed up, and those few minutes had been enough. Bile rose in my throat again, but this time it had nothing to do with morning sickness. That alpha, whoever he was, had assaulted me while I was helpless. And now I was carrying the evidence of that violation. I pulled my knees tighter, trying to hold myself together as panic threatened to overwhelm me completely. How was I supposed to tell Cade? He had done so much for me already, provided shelter, protection, legal support, even companionship. But this, a pregnancy from an assault that happened under his watch, before he could prevent it, would he blame me? Would he still want me here? Or would this be the final straw that proved I was more trouble than I was worth? I don't know how long I sat there on the bathroom floor, spiraling through worst-case scenarios. Long enough that my legs went numb. Long enough that I didn't hear Cade come home from work. He must have noticed something was wrong when I didn't appear for dinner like I usually did. I heard his footsteps approaching down the hallway, then stopping outside the bathroom door. "Ethan?" His voice carried concern but not alarm yet. I tried to answer, but my throat had closed up completely. The door handle turned and I realized belatedly that I hadn't locked it. Cade stepped inside and Mimid spotted me on the floor, test still lying nearby where I had dropped it. His expression didn't change as he looked from me to the test and back again. Then, moving with careful deliberation, he knelt down to my level, not touching, not crowding my space, just making himself smaller and less threatening. What happened? The gentleness in his voice broke something in me. Tears started flowing without my permission, and once they started, I couldn't stop them. I hadn't cried about the assault, hadn't let myself process that trauma because there had been too many other crises demanding attention. But now, faced with undeniable proof of what had been done to me, the emotional dam finally burst. Cade didn't try to hush me or tell me it would be okay. He just stayed there while I fell apart, and when I finally gasped out the story between sobs, the alpha before him, the assault, the pregnancy, he listened without interruption. "Pregnant," I managed to choke out. "Before you got there, another alpha." I couldn't stop him. And now, I couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The test spoke for itself. I waited for Cade's response, bracing for rejection or disgust or even just uncomfortable withdrawal. Instead, his hand reached out slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away if I wanted, and settled warm and steady on my shoulder. "Look at me." I forced myself to meet his eyes, expecting to see disappointment or pity. But his expression was something else entirely, fierce, protective, and absolutely certain. "The child is mine." I blinked, confused. "What?" "No, I just told you." "I know what you told me." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "And I'm telling you that as far as anyone else knows, as far as the law knows, as far as society knows, this child is mine. I'm claiming it, claiming you, both of you." My brain struggled to process what he was saying. "You can't just—" "I can, and I am." He moved his hand from my shoulder to cup my face, thumb wiping away tears. "Listen to me carefully. If word gets out that you were assaulted during heat and became pregnant, society will destroy you. They'll call you damaged. They'll question your worth. They'll make your life hell. And they'll make that child's life hell too. But if I claim this pregnancy as mine, no one will dare say a word." The practical logic was sound, but it still seemed impossible. "Why would you do that?" "Because you deserve better than what happened to you." His jaw tightened. "Because that child didn't ask to be conceived this way and deserves a chance. Because I can protect you both and someone should." There it was again, that phrase he had used before. Someone should. Like the world was full of people who could help but didn't. and he was determined to be different. I wanted to believe him, wanted to accept this impossible offer, but doubt gnawed at me. What if you change your mind later? What if I won't? The absolute certainty in his voice left no room for argument. But we need to make it official, legal, unquestionable. He pulled out his phone and I heard him calling someone despite the late hour. I need marriage documents prepared. Immediately. Standard contract. No prenup, 2 parties. Rush processing. Marriage? The word came out as barely a whisper. This was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. Cade ended the call and focused entirely on me. If we're married, no one can challenge the child's legitimacy. No one can question your status or try to take custody. You'll be protected by my man. My resources, my position. It's the only way to make sure you're both truly safe. My head spun with the implications. Marriage to an alpha, I had known for only 2 weeks. A fake relationship to protect a real pregnancy from a real assault. But as I looked at Cade's determined expression, I realized he wasn't offering this as a temporary fix. He was offering permanence, commitment, protection that would last beyond just the immediate crisis. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, voice small and uncertain. You can. His hand was still on my face, anchoring me to reality. You're stronger than you think, and you won't be doing it alone. I'll be with you every step of the way, not as your captor or your debt holder, as your partner, as your husband. He paused, then added more softly. As someone who genuinely cares what happens to you. That last admission caught me off guard. Somewhere between rescuing me and building walls of protection around me, Cade had developed actual feelings. And if I was honest with myself, I had too. This wasn't just gratitude or dependency. Something real was growing between us, fragile and new but undeniably present. I thought about my alternatives. Going back to my family was impossible. Facing society as an assault victim with an unplanned pregnancy would be devastating. Trying to survive alone with no resources and a baby on the way was unrealistic. But staying here with Cade, accepting his protection and his name, building something that might eventually become genuine partnership, that was possible. Difficult, complicated, but possible. Okay, I whispered. I'll marry you. Something that might have been relief crossed Cade's face. He helped me up from the bathroom floor, steady and patient as my numb legs struggled to support my weight. That night, he didn't leave me alone. He stayed in my room, not in the bed but in the chair where he had kept watch during my nightmare, maintaining his vigil as I processed this new reality. As I lay there in the dark, one hand unconsciously moving to my still flat stomach, I thought about the strange twist my life had taken. Betrayed by family, assaulted by a stranger, rescued by an alpha who was now offering me his name and protection for a child that wasn't his. It should have felt like another trap, another cage. But somehow with Cade's steady presence just feet away, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something that could actually be good. Standing outside the courthouse, my heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought everyone around me could hear it. Cade stood beside me in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, looking every bit the composed businessman about to sign a merger agreement, rather than a man about to get married. For him, this probably felt no different than any other carpet negotiation. But for me, this was surreal in ways I couldn't begin to articulate. We were about to legally bind ourselves together, and I had known this man for barely 3 weeks. Inside, the building smelled like old paper and floor polish. Our footsteps echoed down marble hallways until we reached the designated room. 2 witnesses were already waiting. People from Cade's office whose names I didn't catch and faces I wouldn't remember. They looked professional and disinterested. Probably signed NDAs thicker than the marriage certificate we were about to file. The judge was an older woman with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She looked between us with an expression that suggested she had seen every type of couple imaginable walk through her doors. Young love, practical arrangements, green card marriages, shotgun weddings. Nothing surprised her anymore. She asked the standard questions in a monotone that stripped away any romance the moment might have held. Had anyone forced us into this? No. Were we entering this union of our own free will? Yes. Did we understand the legal implications? Yes. The questions were procedural, perfunctory, designed to check boxes rather than probe deeper truths. Papers appeared. Cade signed first, his signature bold and decisive, each letter formed with the confidence of someone who had signed countless important documents. Then it was my turn. My hand trembled as I held the pen, and for a brief moment I wondered if I should run. But run where? Back to a family that had betrayed me, into a world that would judge me mercilessly for being pregnant and alone. I signed. The pen moved across paper, creating loops and lines that bound me legally to this alpha. Just like that, we were married. No vows, no rings exchanged in that moment. No kiss to seal the union. Just signatures and witnesses and legal documentation. Outside in the bright afternoon sun, Cade finally produced a small box from his jacket pocket. Inside was a simple silver band, no elaborate diamonds or flashy designs. He took my hand and I noticed his fingers lingered, his touch warmer than strictly necessary for this transaction. For appearances, he said, sliding the ring onto my finger. But the way he held my hand afterward, thumb brushing across my knuckles, suggested something beyond mere performance. Back at the penthouse, reality set in quickly. Cade informed me that I would be moving into his bedroom. I had assumed we would maintain separate spaces, keep up the pretense of normalcy in private even if we had to act married in public. But his logic was practical and irrefutable. Staff members talk. Society watches. We need this to appear genuine. So I found myself sharing a bed with an alpha I barely knew. My legal husband in every technical sense. That first night was awkward beyond description. I stayed rigidly on my side of the massive bed. He remained on his, and between us stretched what felt like miles of expensive sheets and unspoken tension. An invisible wall separated us, built from uncertainty and the strangeness of our arrangement. But slowly, gradually, that wall began eroding. I would wake some mornings to find the distance between us had shrunk during sleep, our unconscious selves drawn together despite our waking reservations. Sometimes his arm would be thrown across the space where I had been before rising. Sometimes I would catch myself having migrated toward his warmth in the night. The pregnancy cravings started hitting hard around week 10. One night at 2 in the morning, I woke up with an overwhelming need for pickles and ice cream, the most ridiculous combination, and I was fully aware of the cliché. I lay there debating whether to bother Cade, whether to sneak out myself, whether to just suffer through until morning. Before I could decide, his voice came from the darkness. "What do you need?" Apparently, I had been less subtle in my restlessness than I thought. Embarrassed, I admitted to the craving, expecting annoyance or at least mild irritation at being woken. Instead, Cade simply got up and started getting dressed. "Let's go." The 24-hour convenience store was nearly empty at that hour. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Cade patiently let me browse, picking out 3 different types of pickles because I couldn't decide which sounded right, plus 2 flavors of ice cream. In the car on the way back, he said something that lodged itself in my chest and refused to let go. "You're allowed to need things. Stop treating your own requirements like burdens." It was such a small statement, but it cracked something open inside me. No one had ever given me permission to simply exist with needs and wants. My family had always made me feel like an inconvenience, something to be managed or exploited. But Cade was different. Then came the scandal. Vincent Drake, one of Cade's business competitors and apparently a long-standing rival, gave an interview to a major news outlet. He claimed our marriage was a publicity stunt, that I had manipulated circumstances for financial gain, that Cade was being played by a calculating Omega who saw an opportunity. The story went viral. Social media exploded with opinions from people who knew nothing about my situation but felt entitled to judge anyway. Some defended me, but many more called me a gold digger, a liar, a manipulator who had seduced a powerful alpha for his money and status. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried, something I had not allowed myself to do since that first night when everything fell apart. The words hurt more than they should have because part of me wondered if they were true. Was I using Cade? Was this arrangement unfair to him even though he had proposed it? A knock came at the door, then Cade's voice. "Let me in." When I opened the door, he took one look at my tear-stained face and sat down on the floor right there in the bathroom, pulling me down beside him. His hand found my chin, lifting my face until I had no choice but to meet his eyes. "Their opinions mean nothing. We know what's real." Then he did something I hadn't expected. He called his legal team, his PR people, and within hours had scheduled a press conference. He stood in front of cameras and journalists and methodically destroyed Vincent's credibility, presenting hospital records, police reports, documentation of Dane's trafficking attempt, everything that proved our story was genuine. Vincent's reputation imploded, public sentiment shifted, and that night when we got into bed, I didn't stay on my side. For the first time, I deliberately moved closer and Cade's arms came around me like it was the most natural thing in the world. Maybe it was. The 7th month of pregnancy brought with it a complication I had been dreading since the day I saw that positive test. My doctor scheduled routine genetic testing, standard procedure for monitoring fetal health. But I knew what else those tests could reveal: paternity. Once the results came back, there would be no hiding the biological truth that this child was not Cade's. My anxiety spiked so high that I started making excuses to skip appointments, claiming fatigue or scheduling conflicts. Cade noticed immediately. He was observant in ways that constantly caught me off guard, attuned to my moods and behaviors like he had been studying me for years rather than months. One evening he cornered me in the kitchen where I was pretending to be interested in dinner preparations. His arms crossed over his chest, expression serious but not angry. "Why are you avoiding the doctor?" I tried to deflect, to make up another excuse, but the words died in my throat under his steady gaze. He stepped closer and I watched him read the fear written all over my face. "You think I'll leave when I find out?" The question hung in the air between us. I couldn't answer because yes, that was exactly what I feared. That when confronted with undeniable proof that this child was not his, Cade would realize what a mistake he had made, that his protection and care would evaporate, leaving me alone again. Something changed in his expression. He laughed, but it was bitter and pained, like the sound hurt coming out. "Ethan, I already know." My world tilted sideways. "What?" He guided me to sit down, then took the chair across from me, elbows resting on his knees as he leaned forward. His voice was calm, matter of fact, as he explained what I had never considered. "I was there, remember? I saw what was happening when I broke into that room. Another alpha was already there, already hurting you. I fought him off, called the police, got you out, but I had the timing. I knew what might have already happened." My throat closed up. He had known from the beginning? All this time, through the marriage and the arrangement and the careful building of our life together, he had known this child was not biologically his. I never cared about biology. His eyes met mine, intense and unwavering. "I cared about protecting you." And somewhere along the way, that protection became something more. It stopped being about the child and started being about you. Tears began falling before I could stop them. I had never imagined someone could accept me so completely, with all my trauma and complications and the physical evidence of what had been done to me. "Why would you do all this?" My voice cracked around the words. Cade reached across the space between us, taking both my hands in his. "Because I'm falling in love with you." The confession hit me like a physical blow. Love. Real, actual love. Not obligation or duty or the performance we had been maintaining for the outside world. I froze, unable to process this shift, unable to reconcile the marriage of convenience with the emotions he was now laying bare. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, completely honest for perhaps the first time since we met. A sad smile crossed his face. "You don't have to say anything. I'm not demanding reciprocation. I just needed you to understand why I'm not going anywhere, regardless of what any test reveals." But the truth was, I did feel something. This had stopped being gratitude or dependency weeks ago. Somewhere between the midnight convenience store runs, and the way he held me after nightmares, and the gentle way he touched my growing belly, I had started falling too. I was just terrified to admit it, terrified that naming these feelings would somehow make them vulnerable to destruction. The next day we went to the appointment I had been avoiding. Blood was drawn, tests were run, and we were told results would be available within 48 hours. Those 2 days felt like 2 years. I barely slept, barely ate, anxiety gnawing at me despite Cade's reassurances. When the doctor called us back in, she handed over an envelope with a professional but sympathetic expression. Cade opened it without hesitation, scanned the contents, then slid the paper across to me. The biological father was listed as unknown, no match to Cade's genetic profile. Scientific proof that this child growing inside me had been conceived during that assault by an alpha whose name I didn't even know. I watched Cade's face carefully, looking for any sign of regret or second thoughts. His expression remained neutral, almost peaceful. Then he did something that broke me completely. He picked up the report and dropped it in the trash bin beside the desk. This child is mine. My name will be on the birth certificate. I will raise them, love them, protect them. Biology is just science. Family is choice. The doctor looked between us, seemed to understand the weight of what was happening, and discreetly excused herself to give us privacy. The moment the door closed, I started crying again. But these were different tears, relief and gratitude and overwhelming emotion. Cade pulled me into his arms, and for the first time I hugged him back with everything I had. Holding on tight, pressing my face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath my ear. "I love you too," I whispered into his shirt. His entire body stilled for a moment, then his arms tightened around me. He kissed my forehead, soft and reverent, like I was something precious that might break if handled roughly. "Say that again," he requested quietly. "I love you." Louder this time, more certain. And in that doctor's office, surrounded by medical equipment and sterile walls, our arrangement finally became real in every way that mattered. Labor started 3 weeks before my due date, and I immediately panicked. Cade had been in a meeting when I called him, my voice tight with pain and fear. He was home within 15 minutes, somehow having crossed the city in record time. He found me gripping the kitchen counter, breathing through a contraction that felt like my body was being torn apart from the inside. Hospital. Now. He was already grabbing the prepared bag we had packed weeks ago, his other hand supporting my weight as another contraction hit. The drive was a blur of pain and Cade's steady voice telling me to breathe, that everything would be fine, that I was strong enough to do this. His hand never left mine, even when I squeezed hard enough that I probably bruised his fingers. The delivery room was chaos. Doctors and nurses moving with practiced efficiency, monitors beeping, bright lights overhead. But through all of it, Cade was there. He stayed by my head, forehead pressed to mine during the worst contractions, whispering encouragements that probably sounded ridiculous but somehow helped. "You're doing amazing. Almost there. Just a little more." When the doctor finally said to push, I thought I might die from the pain. But then I heard it. The first cry of my baby, strong and healthy and real. A nurse placed the tiny squirming bundle on my chest, and I looked down at the smallest human I had ever seen. A boy. Perfect and wrinkled and crying, his little fists waving in protest at being forced into the cold, bright world. I touched his tiny hand and watched his fingers instinctively curl around mine. Love flooded through me so intensely it was almost painful. Then Cade was there, looking down at both of us, and the expression on his face made tears stream down my cheeks for entirely different reasons. There was no hesitation, no distance, no reminder that this child was not biologically his, just pure absolute love. "Welcome home, son." His voice was rough with emotion. He reached out carefully and I transferred the baby into his arms. Watching Cade hold my son for the first time, seeing the way he cradled that tiny body like it was made of glass, I knew without any doubt that we were a real family. The hospital kept us for 2 days of observation before releasing us home. Those first weeks were exhausting beyond anything I had imagined. Sleepless nights blurred together, constant feeding schedules, diaper changes that seemed never ending. My body was still recovering, hormones were everywhere, and exhaustion became my permanent state. But Cade stepped up in ways that continually amazed me. He took night shifts, walking circles around the nursery with our son while I got desperately needed sleep. He came home early from work, rescheduled important meetings, and treated fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else in his life. One afternoon, while the baby napped, we sat together on the couch, my head on his shoulder, both of us too tired to do anything but exist in the quiet moment. "Thank you," I said softly, "for everything." His arm tightened around me. "This is my family. You're my husband. That's my son. There's nowhere else I would rather be." The simplicity of his statement, the absolute certainty in his voice, made me fall even more in love with him. But peace never lasts forever. 3 months after our son was born, Dane appeared at our building. Security called up to warn us that someone claiming to be my brother was causing a scene in the lobby, demanding to see me, and had brought news cameras with him. Cade's expression went cold. "Stay here with the baby. I'll handle this." I watched from the window as Cade confronted Dane outside. Cameras rolling, reporters shouting questions. My brother was putting on quite the performance. Tears, dramatic gestures, claims that he had made mistakes and wanted to make amends. Cade's response was ice cold and devastatingly public. "You sold him. You don't get to play family now." Then he did something brilliant. He had his legal team present, evidence right there to the media, bank transactions showing the money Dane had been offered, recorded phone calls discussing the arrangement, documented proof that my brother had attempted to traffic me during my heats. The truth came out in real time, broadcast live. Undeniable. Public opinion shifted instantly. Dane's performance crumbled. Within hours, police arrested him on trafficking charges, and I watched my brother being led away in handcuffs on the evening news. Finally, I was free. Truly free. Months passed. Our son grew, started smiling, began recognizing faces. Cade legally adopted him, finalizing all the paperwork so there could never be any question about parentage or custody. His last name became our son's last name, official and permanent. One quiet evening, with our baby sleeping peacefully in his crib, Cade presented me with a folder of documents. Inside was the completed adoption, the updated birth certificate, every legal protection imaginable. "No one can question now. He's mine. You're mine. We're a family." I cried happy tears, overwhelmed by how far we had come from that terrifying night in a locked room. Cade pulled me close and kissed me. Not gentle or tentative, but deep and meaningful, full of promises for our future. "I never thought I would have this," I admitted. "A real family. You deserve everything good." His forehead rested against mine. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you get it." This was not an ending. It was a beginning, the start of our happily ever after.